Okay. Hello, everybody. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are logging in from. It's such a pleasure to be here with you all today. My name is Amir Shahid. I'm a consultant with the WHO and the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, and it's been my honor to be helping with the coordination of this policy brief, which we are launching today. Thank you so much for being here with us. We're really excited to share our brief with you, to engage in a discussion with you all, to share uh, insights and thoughts with the wonderful panel of speakers that we have with us today, and hopefully some of the people online. Um, I'm aware that many of you are here because you share interest and practices in this intersection, and really hope that today's conversation is just one of many more in this space and helps us advance collectively. It is my pleasure as host to introduce our first speaker, Dr. Gundo Weiler, whose career has seen him working with WHO across Africa, Asia, and Europe, coordinating country support, emergencies, HIV programs, and the European Programme of Work until 2030. He is now Director for Prevention and Health Promotion at the WHO Regional Office for Europe, an area which is very relevant to arts and health, and has also studied social medicine, which is also very appropriate for today's topic, where we look at health from an interdisciplinary perspective and consider upstream causes of illness. Dr. Weiler, over to you.
Thank you, Amir. And also from my side, a good morning, a good afternoon, a good evening, wherever you are joining us from today. On behalf of the WHO Regional Office for Europe, it's a genuine pleasure to welcome you to the launch of our new policy brief, The Role of Arts in Addressing the Health Impacts of Climate Change. We tend to speak of the climate crisis as an environmental problem, a problem of emissions, of temperature, of biodiversity loss. And it is all of those things. But the climate crisis is also a cultural crisis. It's the product of unsustainable values, traditions, and social norms that have been centuries in the making. It reflects, as this policy brief argues so powerfully, a failure not just of environmental management, but of cultural imagination. And that means that solving it demands not only technological innovation and regulatory change, it also demands a cultural transformation. Although arts, culture, and the creative industries alone will certainly not prevent climate change, the journey towards mitigating and adapting to the health impacts of climate change is unthinkable without them. They are a strategic lever. They translate complex science into felt experience. They build the social cohesion and collective agency that knowledge alone can't generate. And crucially, they help communities imagine different futures, which is the precondition for building them. For WHO Europe, this is not a new conversation. It builds on a body of work that reaches back to our landmark scoping review on arts and health, and it reflects our conviction embedded in the second European program of work that health is also a cultural achievement. It is produced not only in hospitals and clinics, but in communities, in neighborhoods, and the stories we tell about who we are and who we want to become. Culture change has to be a collective human endeavor. That is why I want to take a moment to acknowledge who is in this virtual room today. Today, together with passionate people from across the world, we have artists, actors, and activists sitting alongside researchers, public health experts, and policymakers. And that is essential. The mega trends that WHO European second program of work calls on to address, for instance, climate change, widening inequities, eroding trust in institutions, and the fragmentation of communities cannot be solved by any one discipline or any one sector. They require exactly this kind of convergence. They require all of you. Today's event marks a beginning, not a conclusion. We hope that this brief will serve policymakers, ministry officials, funders, and practitioners across our region and beyond as both an evidence resource and a call to action. We are asking governments to embed arts and culture in their climate health strategies. We are asking funders to create the interdisciplinary mechanisms that allow this work to scale. And we are asking all of you to continue working together, because that is the only way to imagine and create a new future. Thank you so much for being here today. Very much looking forward to the event. And back to you, Amir.
Thank you so much, Gundo. Thank you very much for those wise words and for setting us so nicely onto this short journey today. Um, in this it in the spirit of the interdisciplinary nature of this work, it's very befitting that we follow this with a film actually, and we have some notable members of the film world with us today. And it's our pleasure to share a short film made by the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, produced by Elville Production AS, Culture Runners, NYU Steinhardt, and WHO Europe. Um, Over to you.
The climate crisis is a crisis of culture, the symptom of a world out of balance in how we live, how we consume, and how we connect. We are not standing passive. Culture is responding.
She was really great. Yeah.
Artists are transforming invisible data into a collective heartbeat. Creative communities are building an arc of resilience through music that helps us breathe together again, and the weaving of traditional arts into a healthier way of life, turning isolation into movement and grief into a shared purpose. To change the outcome, we must change the story.
Thank you so much. Um, it is my pleasure to welcome Professor Nisha Sajnani, Professor of Drama Therapy at NYU Steinhardt, founding co-director of the Jameel Arts and Health Lab, and lead writer for this brief, and really one of the people without which this would have been absolutely impossible. So over to you, Nisha. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Amir, and thank you all for being here. Yes, absolutely. This brief is a result of a dedicated collaboration from an extraordinary network of policymakers, artists, health practitioners, creative arts therapists, cultural industry leads, climate scientists, on, and students, many of whom are with us here today. And I'm going to reiterate some of what Gundo has already shared, but two assumptions that guided our work. The first being that climate change is a health and culture crisis. It's shaping how people breathe, eat, work, and live, with profound impacts on physical, mental, social, spiritual, and cultural well-being. It's also a cultural crisis rooted in the values, norms, systems, and stories that have normalized environmental harm and widened health inequalities. And when we're talking about culture here, we mean both the shared meanings that shape how people understand health, risk, and responsibility, and the creative practices through which they express, question, and change those meanings. The second assumption that we're relying on is that arts and cultural engagement is a health behavior. We know from a growing body of evidence, including the landmark WHO report that Gundo had mentioned, that was published in 2019 from WHO Europe, and many publications since, that arts and cultural participation can support physical, mental, and social health, from boosting social cohesion to improving mood and quality of life. So, guided by these two threads, this brief treats arts and culture as climate health infrastructure. It brings together a rapid review of literature, an international expert survey, and global case studies to show how arts-based approaches can support climate communication, adaptation, and mitigation, while also generating health co-benefits. Its central argument is that arts and culture should be integrated into cross-sectoral climate health policy rather than be treated as peripheral to it. So, if climate change is not only a scientific and policy challenge, but also a cultural one, the next question becomes, what exactly can arts and culture help us to do differently? One of the clearest findings was that arts-based approaches make climate health links tangible by translating complex science into forms that are accessible, emotionally resonant, and locally meaningful. However, what the evidence suggests is that the arts are most powerful when they do more than inform, when they evoke awe, offer enough aesthetic distance for reflection rather than shutdown, and restore a sense of connection with the natural world that can renew care and responsibility. By connecting people to place and to one another, the arts can support mental health, strengthen social cohesion, build resilience, and help communities process eco-anxiety, trauma, and loss. The academic evidence is still emerging, but the case studies that we found already showed innovation across communication, recovery, and behavior change. And that is why this brief calls for more inclusive evaluation approaches that can better capture health, resilience, and action, especially in climate vulnerable and low resource settings. And this matters because policy is finally beginning to catch up with what communities and practitioners have already been showing us around the world. This brief shows that this agenda aligns with the momentum in global climate and health policy, including the Planetary Health Framework, Health in All Policies, and the WHO Global Action Plan on Climate Change and Health, and the recent inclusion of culture in the UN's Climate Action Agenda, all of which emphasize integrated, intersectoral, and culturally meaningful approaches. This is also a movement that relies on and that is building off of strong public concern and readiness. The brief cites the People's Climate Vote of 2024, which found that 56% think about climate change daily or weekly, 69% factor it into major life decisions, and 72% support a quick transition away from fossil fuels. In other words, there's a clear mandate for approaches that move beyond technical fixes and speak to how people actually live and feel and make meaning. So if that is the context, the final question is not whether arts and culture belong in climate health policy, but what we need to do to bring them in seriously. The brief concludes that mitigation and adaptation require cultural and evolution alongside ecological adaptation because the health impacts of climate change are shaped not only by emissions and infrastructure, but also by stories, behaviors, and social norms. Arts and culture help communities imagine low-carbon, climate-just futures, communicate risk in human terms, and strengthen the collective agency needed for change. So that is why this brief calls for 4 practical actions: embedding arts and culture in climate health strategies, establishing interdisciplinary funding, investing in research and data systems, and institutionalizing partnerships across climate, culture, and health sectors. If there's one thing I've learned from this work, it's that people do not change because of data alone. They change when science is held in stories, in images, and relationships that feel true to their lives, which is the very work of arts, culture, and the creative industries. Thank you so much. I will now pass this on to my colleague, Niels Fitje, Technical Officer for WHO Regional Office for Europe and fellow co-founder of the Jameel Arts and Health Lab. Over to you, Niels.
Thank you very much, Nisha. And thanks to everybody who is contributing to today's panel. Thanks to all of you for joining and making this this conversation so vibrant. So I have the pleasure today to be the moderator for the panel that we have. We've assembled a wonderful panel of speakers, and we're going to start off with the kind of science and artistic voice, and then we're going to have some reflections from our colleagues who are in the policy making space. Everybody's going to reflect about this intersection of arts, culture, health, and climate change. And afterwards, we'll have the opportunity with all of you to have a question and answer session. So I encourage you, as you're listening to our guests, as something strikes your imagination, do start formulating a question so we can ask them to respond. Please, of course, also use the chat. I can see there's already a vibrant conversation going. People are introducing themselves. Please do continue. Of course, requesting you kindly to keep it clean. And also requesting you please to use the reaction buttons. I've seen lots of claps and hearts and thumbs ups. Thank you for that. It always makes people feel welcome. So having said all that, I want to introduce our first speaker, and we thought it would be useful to kind of set the stage a little bit from the science perspective. So we have with us today, we're very pleased to have with us today Andy Haynes, Professor of Environmental Change and Public Health at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine in the UK, who's really a leading research voice in the field of environmental change and public health. So Andy, over to you.
Really, can I say how much I welcome this initiative and congratulate WHO and all the colleagues involved. I think you've already heard that obviously science is important, but we can't do this alone. It's essential, I think, to have collaborations, to have synergies between arts and culture on the one hand and science on the other. And that's really what this event is all about. But I have been asked to say a few words from the scientific perspective to really set the scene. So let me start with this slide, which tries to really summarize in a few images where we are at the moment. As you can see, global temperatures, average temperatures are going up really dramatically, steadily. It's likely that this year will be one of the hottest on record, if not the hottest. You can see that's due to the accumulation of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere, of course, due to human activities. And Europe is the fastest heating region in the world, interestingly enough, particularly the Arctic, which is heating up faster than everywhere else on the planet. And you can see the anomalies and extremes in surface air temperature in a recent year, how that's been dramatically evolving over Europe. And also, of course, that brings with it changes in precipitation, rainfall. So some parts of Europe have seen increases in extreme rainfall. Others have seen increases in drought, in reductions in rainfall. And both of those have very important implications for human health. Next slide, please. So what we know now is that climate change has a whole range of impacts on human health. And I'm not going to go into any detail about those, but this infographic tries to summarize the really rapidly growing evidence around this topic. And you can see how the increasing levels of carbon dioxide and the short-lived climate pollutants like methane causing rising temperature, rising sea levels, increasing extreme weather events. And then through a range of demographic, socioeconomic, and local environmental factors, these influence the magnitude, the size, and the pattern of risk to human populations. And these are experienced right the way from the obvious extreme effects, like extreme heat, for example, which increases death rates amongst the elderly, also affects pregnant women, affects pregnancy outcomes like stillbirths, for example, and premature labor, affects capacity to work, labor productivity, air quality through wildfires, water quality and quantity, food supply and safety. We know that, for example, that there's been increases in food insecurity across the European region, which, by the way, is a very diverse region of 53 countries, ranging right the way from Western Europe to into Central Asia. And then, of course, the impacts on vector-borne disease and other infectious disease agents as well. And we're seeing changes in distribution of some of these vector-borne diseases. And finally, these effects of social factors like increasing poverty, migration probably, perhaps it links with conflict as well. So these are also extremely important in determining the size of the effects on human health. And whilst the greenhouse gas emissions are concentrated in high income and increasingly in emerging economies too, the impacts are felt all around the world. They're different depending on where you are on the planet. They're concentrated in low and middle income countries and communities, but they're experienced everywhere. Next slide, please. But the climate crisis is a crisis for health, and it's going to get much worse over years to come, sadly. But it's also a great opportunity. And it's an opportunity for health because many of the policies that we need to put in place to adapt to and to mitigate climate change can also benefit human health. And this slide just gives a few headline numbers in terms of the benefits, the so-called co-benefits of climate mitigation. So these are benefits that are experienced in the near term, over and above the longer term benefits of reducing the risk of dangerous climate change. For example, air pollution from fossil fuel burning, responsible for hundreds of thousands of deaths in the region every year. And as we move towards clean renewable energy, we can, of course, dramatically reduce and perhaps, at least in theory, completely avoid those premature deaths. Physical inactivity is a major risk factor for many non-communicable diseases, and the best way to get people walking and active is get them walking and cycling, using public transport in their day-to-day lives. And then finally, the food system. The food system is dysfunctional in many ways. It doesn't provide healthy diets for much of the population, and at the same time is responsible for perhaps a quarter of greenhouse gas emissions and a major driver of biodiversity loss. So reforming the food system to provide healthy, sustainable diets, giving people those dietary choices is going to be really important and could prevent many deaths throughout the region. So you can see the potential magnitude of the opportunity, and the problem is we're not, of course, achieving those opportunities. So we need to, as we've already heard, think about cultural change. And the health system can't do this alone, but the health system is an important player. We know that greenhouse gas emissions from the health system are about 5% of global total greenhouse gas emissions. So if the healthcare system was a country, it would be the fifth biggest emitter on the planet, something like that. And we see very variable aspirations and impetus towards climate resilient and low carbon health systems through the region, summarized on this slide. So there's still quite a long way to go. So in summary, there's a lot that we can do through climate adaptation and resilience on the one hand, mitigation on the other, moving towards a healthy, more equitable net zero economy. And this will require, of course, dramatic economic and cultural change, which is what, as I see, this event is all about. So I welcome it very much and look forward to collaborating with all of you on the call, and congratulate all of you on this very important report. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thanks for the data. Thanks for the insight. Some of this information we probably are all aware of on some level, but the question then becomes, how do we act? What can we do? And I think this is where we want to bring in some of our actors, artists, and activists that Gunda was referring to at the beginning. And we're going to start off with Mark Ruffalo. Many of you will know him, a US actor well known for being the greenest of the Avengers. But more importantly, maybe for this webinar, he's also a co-founder of the Solutions Project, which brings together people from science, from business, and from culture to accelerate the energy transition. So, Mark, through your work with the Solutions Project, you've helped bring frontline communities into the public imagination and into the policy conversation. So from your personal perspective as an artist and as an organizer, what have you learned about how stories and cultural visibility can shift power and accelerate the kinds of climate health solutions that communities are already building on the ground?
Yeah. Thank you for having me here. And Nisha, thank you for inviting me, and my fellow guest speakers, and all of you who are joining from all over the world. This is a very important conversation to be having. We certainly, I don't want people to feel like this is their fault because somehow we haven't been able to tell these stories. This is a policy fault. This is an economic fault. This is not a cultural fault. But we have our part to play in this, and it's an enormous part, as we see the study shows us. As an actor and an activist, I have seen the power, not in this particular sense, but something like Dark Waters, which addresses forever chemicals. And we made that movie. It was a very abstract understanding that people had about forever chemicals. That movie brought that story and all of the science and the fight of one attorney against the chemical industry, DuPont specifically, but also 3M. And that movie has literally changed the world in the policies that it's created, the laws that it's created throughout the world, and people's understanding of what PFAS is. Now, I'm not tooting my own horn about that, but there is a policy paper on it that shows just how powerful that film was in informing the culture, but also then informing change. Real laws have been changed. We went to the EU, we showed it there, and days later they were already making laws that stopped PFAS being put in makeup and in food containers and so on and so forth. The Solutions Project was primarily started and moved towards telling the stories of frontline communities. these people are already heroes. They're already the people who are working on mitigation. They're working on building out. One of our first stories was a young woman who had a drug addiction, who was in and out of the prison system, and she became a solar worker, and it changed her life. And it was something that she was very proud of, because she saw the devastation that frontline communities, mostly people of color, were experiencing because of climate change and concretization of their homes and their lands. And that's the kind of story that inspired other people to become solar workers. Today we have one of our grantees has a project called the Maranya Project in Puerto Rico, where they're planting forests, and they're getting people, neighbors and young people involved in planting the forest. And that's a creative act. To engage in nature is a creative act. It's and why culture is so important is it taps into something that we innately desire in our lives, which is a communication with a creative act. And fighting climate change can be seen as a creative act. And that's why it's so important that we connect creativity with the idea of saving the planet. Our experience of nature is a creative act. Planting a tree is a creative act. Making art is a creative act that connects us to the world in a universal way, and our brothers and sisters, which is, in essence, this whole ecosystem and our relationship to it.
Mark, thank you very much. I think a very clear kind of an insightful oversight, really, of how the arts can help create not just a future, not just an imagination, but also policy change. I think we feature an example like this in the policy brief as well in South Africa, where a film helped to change policy. A film was admitted as evidence in a court case. I think those things are really clear indications of how culture can support the change that we're all looking for. Mark, I know you have to leave. I don't know if you have just another minute or two.
Yes, I do.
Just a minute, one final question. Often when we talk about the sciences, we almost implicitly understand the skill, the learning, the kind of the rigor that goes into creating evidence, creating scientific progress, etc. But we rarely really, I think, acknowledge and talk about the skill, the talent, the knowledge, the craft of the arts. And I just wonder if you want to say a few words about the fact that it requires a certain skill on behalf of the artists, the actors, the people in the cultural space to do something that they do particularly well. That's not to say that nobody else can or should do it, but I think maybe you can say a little bit about the craft that's involved in creating these stories and how challenging and difficult that can be.
Yes, and it could go from someone who's just emerging in a craft and storytelling to, someone like me who's been doing this for the better part of their lives, 30 years. I mean, it's a noble endeavor to be an artist, and it's not easy, and certainly the rewards are not always monetarily measured, but what it gives you in its connection to the world and the people is profound. We don't know where these stories are going to come from. The beautiful thing about this is that the stories are still waiting to be written, and they'll be written by people who are just coming into it. And we do learn a craft, but that's a long journey towards a need to express yourself. And every artist has some part in some greatness in them that they feel that they have to express to the rest of the world. And that's something that is, yes, it's a lot to learn to do this, but there's also a greater need inside of you of expression that carries you along that journey.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Mark. I appreciate those insights, and wanted to thank you again for being able to join us, and wish you well also on this journey.
Yes.
Thank you so much.
No,
So I'm going to
thank you.
hand over now to Ananya Sharma, who's the creative lead of a beautiful climate, art, and health project in India called Hawaii Mind Bat, which is also featured in the policy brief. To give you the floor to say a little bit about it, and reflect on your journey. Over to you.
Hey Niels, thank you. Hey everyone, it's my honor to be here. And as we sit here in the session with all of you, with many advocates in this room discussing the role of the arts, I noticed myself thinking about the air in Nandagri and Bhalaswa at New Delhi. Here we have this phrase "Hawa mein baat." It is usually used to dismiss something as talking in the air or a small talk or sometimes like a meaningless chatter. And when we talk about the health impacts of climate change here today, we must realize that uh, for many, these aren't policy points. These are physical realities. It is a poisonous smell ingrained in the body. It is a cramped home with no fresh air. It is the choice between a health appointment or a day's wage. This work has tried to reclaim this phrase. We are no longer just talking in the air. We are making the invisible visible through community-driven art. In the next slide, what you see are more than personal expressions. They are more like political statements. Because air pollution in Delhi is a systematic breakpoint where health, education, mobility, and livelihood collide together. Marginalized communities, especially women in the informal economy, bear the brunt of economical hazards that they did not really create. And this creative showcase was like an intertwined relationship of issues, where if a woman cannot breathe in the air in her home, or if the local parks are locked and unsafe, and the drinking water is undrinkable, both her mental health and social cohesion will suffer. And this exhibit kind of forefronted these challenges alongside their aspirations for a simple, clear blue sky, which isn't very common in Delhi anymore. In the next slide, to address this and bring issues to the forefront, we used a participatory-led approach, which we often use in our other projects as well, where we brought women together and collaborated with artist Niroj Satpathy and Momita Bhasak to explore their lives and challenges as data points. So for too long, these women have been discussing in room. So for too long, these women were being discussed in rooms they didn't have access to. But with Hawa Mein Baat, they wove their own stories of issues that often goes unnoticed and in locations that are really often seen. Because if you would think Nandagri and Bhalaswa, I'm sure not a lot of people would know about these areas. We then used local art methods like weaving and stitching to translate complex climate sciences into tangible and more relatable experiences. And this is where we used art and culture as a tool to understand and narrate how a gray sky affects their lives, which affects their day-to-day lives. Because to them, this wasn't just about making art, it was also about reclaiming the narrative of their own health and surroundings. In the next slide, we then ended our journey. Began and ended our journey with leadership. This showcase was first debuted and led by the women in their own communities. The goal for these women was to become an active part of decision making and local governance in the issues that impact them the most. And as this policy brief recommends, integrating art and culture in the climate and health strategies is not a luxury anymore. It's an essential infrastructure. So when we support women's voices and participation, we move from talking in the air to building a just and livable future. That's it. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ananya. I can only encourage everybody to have a look at the policy brief, have a look at this and the other case stories that we present for inspiration, but also for just some wonderful work that is being done around the world.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Ananya. So, rounding up our arts interventions and our cultural interventions, I'd like to introduce Alice Sharp. Alice is the artistic director of Invisible Dust in the United Kingdom, which has really been doing this kind of work in the intersection of arts, climate, and advocacy for over 20 years. So far longer than we've been engaging with it here at WHO. Alice, over to you.
Thanks very much, Nils, and also to Nisha. Yes, I'm Alice Sharp. I'm the artistic director of Invisible Dust, and we bring artists and scientists together to imagine new climate futures. To look at the question today, I really want to turn to not an artist actually, but to a scientist, Einstein. And Einstein says, we can't solve problems by using the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. We can't use the same kind of thinking we used when we created them. So what does Einstein really mean by this? I think he means we need deep cultural transformation, which is called for in this WHO policy brief. It's a challenge to us to step outside of the thinking that we have today. That thinking can often sound like solutions, but aren't a radical change. That means we can't just rearrange the deck chairs on the Titanic. Does deep cultural transformation mean continue what we're doing already, but do it less? Or does it mean let's do it in a different way? I think that Einstein meant we need deep cultural transformation, and this is a real challenge. And whose job is it to make the invisible visible? This slide shows how humans censor costumes that change colour with air pollution by Kasia Mulger. Whose job is it to imagine that the future that we can't see yet? If when we walked along our streets in big cities and we had black clouds coming out of every car, we'd all stop driving. Instead, the pollution that killed Rosamond Adukisi Debra's child, who was 9 years old, just because she lived next door to one of the busiest roads in London, disappears as if invisible. For Invisible Dust programme Breathe, wonderful artist Dryden Goodwin created beautiful drawings of people leading the battles against our invisible, dangerous pollution. A couple of slides later, you'll see it, from London to Lahore in Pakistan. Breathe really makes you think about each breath you take. How clean is that breath? And something we often take for granted. In Brazil, we are creating work with Pivo, exploring the health of our Atlantic Ocean through artists reimagining experiments of the future. Art that doubles as an ocean filter. Art that looks at the man-made and natural forms on a beach due to pollution. The best artists bring to this conversation a fearlessness of the imagination. They help us to meet Einstein's challenge by stepping out of what is easy and what we've thought of before. You can see this slide with Simon Faithfull's face actually becoming a fungi. What is that relationship with nature? Artists help us to reimagine the deep cultural transformation we need. And that's what we do at Invisible Dust. We marry that art and that science. We bring together the best artists and the best scientists, and we create new thinking. That Einstein saw as necessary. And here you have Dryden Goodwin with Breathe, and Rosamond Adjei Deborah standing with Sadiq Khan in front of her own projection of herself behind. A mother who lost a child, was the first person in the world who's on their death certificate, it said, was air pollution. It's our best bet for creating the genuinely new and original thinking we need. At Invisible Dust, we believe this is how we realize the deep cultural thinking we require. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Alice. And also for those wonderful pictures. Just creating, I think, an instant connection with the challenge. So we now have 4 speakers who are going to reflect on what we've been talking about, reflect on the policy brief from the perspective of policy. First, we're very pleased to have 2 speakers from the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health in Finland, and then the Ministry of Culture, Communication and Sports in Ireland. And so I'll go first to Heli Hettunen, who's the Senior Ministerial Advisor at the Ministry of Social Affairs and Health in Finland. Over to you, Heti.
Thank you. And first, I really want to thank you for organizing this webinar. And we have already heard important perspectives and interesting perspectives in this discussion. I think it's quite clear that climate change is a health threat, and responding it requires a holistic and human rights based approach. And I think that this policy brief complements and brings together in an excellent way earlier work related to the arts and culture and health impacts of climate change. It demonstrates that while robust evidence and technical solutions are essential, they are not sufficient on their own. For policy to be effective, it must also be culturally meaningful, and people really need to understand it in their everyday life. And we see it as an important message that arts and culture are effective way to support people and societies in this climate crisis. And the evidence very clearly shows that arts and culture strengthen climate health communication, support mental health, alleviate climate anxiety, and build community resilience. And these are all areas where health systems and societies are already experiencing pressure, and we really need to find new kind of solutions, as was very well described in previous speech. So we really need to find new solutions, not only use those we have already used. And then I would like to shortly highlight a few points. First, integration and cross-sectoral collaboration. We think that this policy brief calls for making use of existing structures and cross-sectoral collaboration, and as well local action. And we think that this approach supports the implementation capacity of countries and governments and societies, also in this situation of very unstable economic situation. And second, mental health and prevention. The psychological and social impacts of climate change are broad and growing, especially among young people, but of course in general in whole society. And arts and culture-based community-driven approaches offer meaningful means and very effective means to support mental well-being And at the same time, they also helps people to engage people to take action around this topic. And third and last point, evidence and learning. I see great value that this policy brief. In this policy brief, there is a recommendation to invest research and evaluation that take into account the co-benefits of arts and culture and health and environment. And I really appreciate that WHO has taken a role here as a disseminator of the knowledge and good practices, and also support learning between countries. And lastly, our message is quite simple. Arts and culture are part of the infrastructure that protects health and changes our behavior in climate crisis. And this policy brief is very important to member states to help us to make our policies more effective, more equitable, and more human. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Hedi, and thanks for making the time to be here today. I think one of the challenges that we always experience in this intersectoral work is that it's always one sector or the other, but never both together. And I'm so pleased today that we have both parts here in our meeting. And so it's with great pleasure that I pass over to Rebecca. Rebecca Mitch is Principal Officer of Creative Ireland in the Department of Culture, Communications and Sport in Ireland. So Rebecca, over to you.
Thanks so much, Niels, and thanks so much for including me in this webinar today. It's just really fascinating, not just to read the brief, but to hear everybody's amazing insights on it and on this hugely important issue. I'll just very briefly explain. Creative Ireland is in Ireland a whole of government wellbeing programme that is based on creative and cultural participation for individuals and communities. So we work across government with local government, NGOs, community groups, creative practitioners, but with the principle that it's the voice, experience, and values of those communities that must be at the heart of the design and delivery of these creative projects. And we very much appreciate your inclusion as a case study of the Creative Climate Fund, which the next iteration of which actually has just been launched. Excuse me, I'm speaking particularly today from the experience, what we've learned from that work around the Creative Climate Funds, but also to our work on arts and health, or arts and culture, as a phrase that people might also be familiar with. So I'm particularly sharing my insights from those experiences. And we are now bringing those two pieces together as we work with our health service executives, our health service executive and our environmental protection agency, to join those two strands together. So exactly what this brief envisages. So it's hugely useful and hugely important for us in that work. What I want to do is just give a few very brief insights into what I thought really jumped out at me from the report, and that is those key success factors that were identified in the literature review around targeted funding, collaboration, recognition of artists, and in-kind resources. So hopefully I can give you a sense of how we're being informed from our on-the-ground experience as we continue to evolve our strategic approach. In terms of the targeted funding, yes, of course, absolutely important. But what makes it even more powerful, if it's based not just on clear government strategy, but on joint policy and strategy. So, for example, our Creative Climate Fund is a joint endeavour from a policy and a funding perspective between ourselves and our Department of Climate and the Environment. And similarly, we work in that way with our Department of Health as well. So I think you can't underestimate how not just targeted funding, but joint funding commitments send such a powerful signal out to the ground, and it's such an important way of giving people the mandate to act then at the local level. when it comes to that point about collaboration and collaboration across cultural practitioners, climate scientists, and policymakers, again, and I'm sure this will resonate with so many people, you cannot overestimate the importance of capacity building and putting the time and funding into capacity building. And I think it's fair to say that that's been hugely important for the success and the growing interest in our Creative Climate Fund. In the two previous funds, there's been a huge amount of work done in terms of conferences, residential courses, workshops, project management clinics, all kinds of different ways of coming at this to build that capacity, not only to make those projects a success, but it's really essential for that enduring impact and sustainability. And coming back to this idea of infrastructure, these people and their relationships are our infrastructure. So it's so important that we grow it and nurture it. And I'm so struck. I think one of the things that really is a great achievement in this brief is to capture that amazing concept so clearly about how it's the creative practitioners have that unique part to play in transforming data that seems so abstract and distant to people and connecting it with their own lived experience and value and everyday lives. And I'm very much reminded of one of our creative climate projects, the Air We Breathe. Again, it does strike me how often air pollution is coming up in this conversation as well. But I suppose for people to share knowledge, they have to know each other. And it really is important to build that infrastructure that allows them to understand each other's, enough of each other's knowledge base to exchange that information and learning and really work together effectively. In terms of recognition of artists as legitimate partners, hugely important point. I think we need to think a little bit more about the language that we use. You might have heard me say creative practitioners here, because we tend to use that term to go beyond just fine artists, and particularly to include craft and creative practitioners who would use craft techniques. That is something that is hugely resonant with communities. We found that over and over again. And I think it's something that's particularly important in terms of the importance of all of this work for preserving cultural heritage. And also we found it hugely effective as a medium for intergenerational approaches. So on the one hand, guarding that heritage, but another way of finding new and innovative responses to it in the modern world. I would also say, absolutely, we must recognize artists, creative practitioners as partners, but those communities and individuals who will actually create this work on the ground are also partners. And that's something I think we can develop as we go. And I'm sure it's something that very much speaks to the experience people in this field are having already.
Thank you.
Access to in-kind resources, another infrastructure, something that central government is probably least able to do. And I would just say the importance there working through aggregators like local government and NGOs is absolutely essential for our experience of being able to translate strategy on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Rebecca. The reactions have been going crazy. We're seeing thumbs up, claps, heart emojis. I think you've really resonated with a lot of our colleagues listening in today. I want to now hand over to two colleagues of mine before we open the floor up for questions from our audience. So if you've got questions, do start thinking about it. The chat is buzzing, so it's fantastic to see the questions there. But do also feel free to raise your hand in the question and answers section, and we'll try to call on as many of you as we can. But before we do that, I want to hear from my colleague Francesca Racioppi, who's the head of office at the WHO European Centre for Environment and Health, and who has a climate and health remit, but who also has a much broader remit than that in terms of environment. So, Francesca, over to you for any reflections on the policy brief.
Thank you very much, Niels, and congratulations on such an inspiring assembly of people coming not only from different parts of the world, but from so many different disciplines. And I have to say that from the WHO European Centre for Environment and Health here in Bonn, where we support the member states to address the broad environment and health agenda. So the chemical safety, the forever chemicals, the air pollution that have come throughout the previous intervention, they are the bread and butter of our daily work. We are the center that produce, for example, the air quality guidelines that are being used as a benchmark by member states. So I'll say that when Niels approached us and speaking and saying, oh, you know, we would like to have a policy brief on arts, the first reaction was, wow, this is intriguing, this is really new, and this is challenging. Why? Because of the very important thing that was said a few minutes ago. It's challenging because we are bringing together two communities that very often live next to each other, but we can knock on the walls, and on the other side you hear knocking on the other words, but we hardly have the opportunity of breaking that walls and come together, which is not always very easy, because the first thing that then we have to do is to develop the same lingo and understanding each other. So I have to say that one of the challenges that we had at the very early onset of the development of this policy brief was really for us to learn about the language and the expressions of arts, and perhaps for the artists to come to terms with some of the very precise terminology that we use in sciences. So we have been bringing, you know, the numbers and the evidence there to this one. But why are we looking at this with a huge interest? In Andy Hines' initial presentation, you might have seen mental health featuring a cluster together with the effects of floods. Why? Because the original engagement that we had from a health perspective into this was mainly because of dealing with the trauma of those affected by traumatic events, like floods, like hurricanes, like losing your livelihood because of that. But over time, we came to realize that it is much more than that. That is just the tip of the iceberg. And for those who are traumatized by acute events, you have millions more whose well-being is diminished. Over the last few years, we have seen accumulating a lot of this evidence around the climate anxiety, which is in itself a descriptor of perhaps many more, you know, sentiments and emotions that have to do with the lack of agency, the uncertainty about the present and the future, particularly for the new generations. So this policy brief talks specifically to this dimension, to the fact that we do realize that if we want to maintain and to keep people out of the point in time when you need, you know, treatment, when you need the diagnosis, when you need the health systems to take them in charge, there is so much more that we can do in the communities to create a connection, to create a sense of agency, and to regain a sense of agency and feeling empowered once again in, you know, in acting in our immediate environment. So much of what we are learning through this collection of case studies that is very interesting, and we will be very happy to bring it broadly, will feature and will support our work in this domain. In a few months, we will be releasing another policy brief, this time on climate change and mental health, which is more and more important also from a policy point of view for our member states, as we have seen last year in a high-level event during the Hungarian presidency of the EU. So thanks once again, Niels, for leading and coordinating with the Jameel art centers and all the experts that worked over, can I say this? We started working on this more than 2 years ago. So it gives you an idea of the complexity of what has been done. So you look now at a beautiful glossy report, but behind that there is the sweat, creativity, and commitment of 100 people who committed to that. Thank you very much.
Indeed. Thank you, Francesca. Thank you also for your collaboration, for colleagues in your office who helped support throughout the journey. But you're right, it's been a very long and complicated path, and I'm very pleased that we've arrived with such a wonderful product. So last but certainly not least, I want to hand the floor over to Rob before we then open up for Q&As. Rob is a special representative for climate and health here at the WHO Regional Office for Europe. And as Andy mentioned at the top of the meeting, he is also deeply involved in the Pan-European Commission on Climate and Health. Rob, over to you.
Thanks very much, Niels. I'm not sure whether I'm going to be able to add value above and beyond what you've already heard from Alice and Anya, Nisha, Mark, Andy, and others. But indeed, I'm very engaged with the Pan-European Commission for Climate Change and Health that you just referred to, chaired by former Prime Minister of Iceland, Katrín Jakobsdóttir, and actually with Sir Andy Haynes, who presented to us earlier here as the chief scientist, which is launching its call to action or recommendations on the 17th of May at the World Health Assembly to over 100 ministers from across this huge European region. Why am I bringing that to your attention as a group interested in this particular policy brief? Well, I'm interested in bringing that forward because of one recommendation that this commission will make, and it's about moving beyond the unsustainable growth model that we currently work within. Maybe talking to the new world to which Mark referred a little earlier, and how we articulate it or tip it or nudge it towards an economy of well-being, where growth and progress is not measured by GDP, not measured by how much we subsidize things that make us sick. Here in the European region, 444 billion euros are given in subsidies to fossil fuels. That's subsidies to invisible dust. That's subsidies to ill or poor health and well-being. So that's not the future we all want to see in our kids grow up and ourselves grow up in. I'm just returning from the Aral Sea, the most astonishing, catastrophic environmental disaster of the last century. 68,000 square kilometers of toxic dust now sat where a sea once was. And that's affecting about 3 million to 4 million people with adverse negative effects. Why was this sea starved of water? Well, for economic growth, for agriculture, for economic prosperity. It's a model that we're now seeing replicated in the Caspian Sea, 380 something thousand kilometers, the largest lake in the world, with the petrochemical pollutants included, to which was referred to earlier. So this model is unsustainable. It does, and I would certainly speak to this. It's not just unsustainable, but it requires that cultural shift to which you referred and others referred to earlier. When I look at the communities around the Aral Sea in the most remotest parts of Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan, their hope for the future lies within the community. That's where they bind and find solutions. And that expression that is made at a local level is not just enhanced, but is sometimes dependent on arts and culture. So I cannot speak loudly enough to how important this area of work and this policy brief is to climate and health. And as a climate and health envoy, I'm really excited about the potential. And I know our commission, when they launch their recommendations in Geneva on the 17th of May, will also note attention to the arts, culture, and policy brief for climate health action. So I just want to say huge congratulations and thanks for inviting me to just say a few words, and happily say more should we have time.
Thank you very much, Rob. Wonderful. Well, a big thanks to all our panelists. But now we have about half an hour for perhaps the juiciest part of this meeting, and that's a conversation with all of you. So don't pin me. I think this is about trying to get everybody to talk with each other and to talk together. So if you've got a burning question, I encourage you to put your hand up. Well, I'll ask you to unmute yourself, and do try to keep your questions as concise as possible with respect to everybody else who wants to ask a question. If you have a question directed at somebody, do let us know. Otherwise, I'll ask our panel members to maybe raise your hand if it's a question that you're very keen to respond to. Otherwise, I might just point to one or the other of you. So, and also apologies, I will probably get names wrong as I call them out. So I'm going to apologize already now. But we have a hand up from is it Lul? Over to you.
So my question is, thinking about health in all policies and how we struggle as health professionals to get health into policy areas other than health, how can we at pace advance and integrate considerations for the arts in policy areas other than health? Because health, let's say, is generally a key champion of the arts, particularly as given the conversation today. So how can we do this at pace, get policy areas such as transport, economy, planning, to make this link between arts, climate, and health? I've got some ideas of my own, but I really wanted to put that question to the panel.
So, Lud, that's a great question. I'm also very pleased that you think that culture and health are already working actively together. I'm not sure that's always the case, and maybe not across the board. I think there's probably still a lot to be done here. But maybe I can pass this to one of our policy colleagues, maybe Rebecca, and then Heli, if you want to have a stab at that, at the question of how do we get not just a cross sectoral conversation going, but a multi-sectoral conversation. Rebecca.
Well, nice small question to start. That's great. I think, I suppose in a way that cuts to the heart of what the Creative Ireland programme is, that it is trying to give that piece around culture and arts and creativity a place at the table, if you like. I think it actually, and I'm sure everybody's so familiar with this, but I really wouldn't underestimate the importance of having that visible cooperation on policy and strategy. It really does matter, as you all know, when it is written down a strategy, when it is written down in a commitment, and the mandate that gives and the transparency it brings. And that does take a lot of work. And again, we talk about building the relationships and the collaboration among the creative practitioners and the climate scientists. There's a job of work that always needs to be done across government on that as well. And it is about helping our colleagues across government to see how creative participation is an enabler. Now, I know there's an issue there we need to be careful of about not instrumentalizing the arts and creativity. But that is where we have made progress. Obviously, we wish we were further along that path, but we are making some progress. So I do think those relationships and those statements, and then the mandate that it gives to influence what can be seen quite mundane, but the practical decisions on the ground, you really can't underestimate the importance of that.
Thanks very much, Rebecca. Heli, do you want to chime in? And then I'll probably ask Rob to say a word or two before I take our next question. Heli, over to you.
Yes, thank you so much. I think that Rebecca also already mentioned some very important points. But what we have learned in Finland is that we need we need structures. We believe in structures, and we already have structures between ministries to collaborate together and create shared understanding, create discussion together, discussion so that we really understand each other, and then we can continue to make the shared policy initiatives. And there are a couple of things I would like to say that what is important, what I have found important, is to find a kind of win-win solutions that show that what are the benefits to all those who are involved in the policy making. And then it motivates quite well. And then what is also important, what I mentioned already, is kind of knowledge base and data, which shows really that what are the impacts and what is needed to go forward. This is sort of what is our experience. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Heli. Maybe finally, Rob, you're kind of at the heart of this question with the Commission. Do you want to say a couple of words on this?
Yeah, I think that the point I would make here is you can either choose to go and advocate sector by sector, which is incredibly time-consuming, resource-heavy, or you can look at where each sector interacts. And the most obvious point for me is the cities or the municipalities. 80% of the European region, of the 53 member states in the European region, 80% of that population will live in urban or city environs by 2050. So the municipalities, the mayor's offices, are usually very well resourced, is where we see phenomenal innovation in terms of climate and health, but where you can really find intersectoral sort of where all these issues in different sectors come together. The second point I would make here is really reaching heads of state, not again going sectors by sector, but having better accountability, stronger accountability at a head of state level for climate health action, because that definitely spurs action across different sectors. And it's something that the Commission will recommend on the 17th of May when it launches its call to action.
Thanks very much, Rob. So we've got some hands up. And I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to take two questions at a time and then see if I can distribute them to to our panel members. So we have Andrea first, and then maybe Olga, you can also mention your question and we'll try to distribute them. Andrea, over to you.
Hello, very nice to meet you. Can you hear me? Yeah.
Very well.
Perfect. Okay, my name is Andrea. I'm from Costa Rica, and the first thing I want to say is congratulations on this project, especially through the eyes of a country that is facing direct consequences of climate change. To be very direct, my question is related more to the communication side of that accompanies the art in fighting climate change and acknowledging these health impacts. So specifically on the work that you did on the short film in South Africa, working with indigenous communities, and also the project that you presented today of Hawam in Bat. I'm sorry for the pronunciation. But basically, as a student in communications, what I've seen is that it's very hard to transmit a message in such an oversaturated context where we're consuming social media so much, for example, and the way that art manages to really break these walls. What I want to know specifically is how are you able to generate this sense of awe, this sense of feeling, like related to something that maybe is not going through your body directly. In the case of Costa Rica, for example, many consequences that indigenous communities are facing, that maybe if I speak about them here in Europe are going to be taking in a different way, in a kind of like external way. How are you able to create that connection between what these people are facing and these other people that can, as you mentioned, are the biggest source of emissions? So again, thank you for the panel. It's very interesting.
Thank you very much, Andrea. So I think I'll probably ask our artists to respond to that in a second. But before we do, Olga, would you like to ask your question as well?
Sure, thank you so much. And thank you for organizing the event and the speakers and the panels and everyone who's here today. It's been fantastic. I'm an artist and a Qigong instructor based in Whitstable in the UK. And I so happen to work between the visual arts and a well-being practice, and working from the perspective of indigenous ways of being and living on this planet, and working with Qigong to make this practice accessible. It's been mentioned in the chat at one point that we also need to think about how disabled people experience climate change and how it's different for many communities in that way. And also connecting ourselves back to ourselves, so reconnecting the body, and helping work with well-being in terms of physical and mental health and emotional health. So I'd be very happy for anyone to get in touch with me if you wanted to know more, if you're curious about how, in a very practical way, we can do that for ourselves and our communities as well. I wanted to ask if there's anyone with experience of working with water distribution, water pollution, because we locally in the community here, there's an ongoing crisis with water pollution, and there's a petition going also would be really grateful if anybody would like to sign, especially if you're in the UK. And the local water company is dumping untreated sewage into the sea. And there was a recent discussion and film screening as well, and it's an ongoing problem. So we need all the help we can use to take this petition to Parliament. And
Thank
so
you.
would be grateful for anyone who's had experience with such endeavors and maybe projects.
Thanks very much, Olga. So a concrete question here also, maybe for the chat, if there are people who have resources or ideas. Olga, if you want to put the petition in the chat, people can look at that as well. I'm going to start with the first question. How do we generate awe? And I think that's maybe a question for some of our artists in the room. Ananya, maybe I can pass this to you first. Awe is a big word, but inspiration, community, those kinds of, and maybe even awe. Can you reflect on that a little bit? How did you generate the kind of artistic momentum through your project?
Thank you, Niels. I think our main agenda for this project was to build that safe space with the women first, and for them to feel comfortable enough to share all of these issues, share what they're going through, because at more cases wasn't the correlation of the problem that they're facing and they are facing because of air pollution they couldn't understand the correlation. So for us to help them understand that was our big first step. And for us, art then eventually it became like a sort of like understanding how to fix this whole, or at least help them understand this problem as a systematic problem, where it's not just putting a mask and feeling that you have kind of you're building somewhat of a barrier with air pollution, but it's also understanding how other bridges also that you have to burn a little bit. I think. Yeah.
Thank you. That's I think the community aspect, the co-creation aspect that you mentioned is so vital to many of these projects. I can also see that Mark, you're still in the chat. It's great. Thank you so much for staying. And maybe you can say a few words about this, the question of awe, because it accompanies conversations around arts and culture all the time. How do we generate awe? Is that even something that is possible?
Well, every artist sort of speaks from their own personal experience that they relate to the world that is completely unique to them, but it also is universal. She was talking about the the Costa Rican indigenous community. I found so much awe of the world through their interrelational understanding of the world. And there's a lot of ways to approach this. It doesn't have to be just the devastation of climate change. It could also come from how we appreciate and experience the world around us and our interconnectivity to it, which is a deeply indigenous worldview that immediately creates awe inside of our hearts when we can experience the world from that point of view. And so telling those stories, getting into their worldview is so profoundly satisfying for a Western audience, because we've lost that, but we all still remember the calling of it. And I think it's in those ways that we actually start to touch on awe. It's how we're awed by the world around us. And it doesn't necessarily have to meet directly on climate change. It could be how we nurture the world around us and how we relate to it and how that fills us.
Thank you. Thanks, Mark. That's very, very true and resonates, I think, a lot with myself, and I can see from the hearts with a lot of people on this call as well. Olga, I haven't forgotten your question, but I think it's more of a resource question. So oh, Alice, did I see you? Do you want to say a couple words on it?
Yeah. If it's possible. Yeah. Just very quickly on ore, and then the water question. I think the sense of awe, I'm really pleased someone's brought this into the conversation, because I think it's really important that people are inspired. I'm working in Finland at the moment as part of the European Capital of Culture in Oulu, which is a subarctic region, and obviously Heli will know it. And that last slide where you had the beautiful tree with the circular holes going through it is one of our artists that we're working with. And Antti Leitonen is looking at nature in a way to give us new views into the landscape. And my concept around that is about reconnecting with nature's time. We're going ever more fast. People have mentioned mental health problems. Are we losing touch with the seasons? Are we losing touch with the slow pace of life? And actually, is that something that actually is creating a lot of the problems we've talked about with climate change and mental health? And as mentioned very much earlier, the Arctic is facing climate change. One of the most extreme areas of Europe is the Arctic at the moment, 4 times the rest of the world. So it's really, really important. And those artworks are opening in June in Oulu this year. On the water, I think it's a really, really, really important issue that's coming up around Britain, which is a lot of the water companies are not taking the environment seriously. And it is that economic model that Rob mentioned. Do we prioritize our environment, or are we prioritizing growth and profit? And it's very direct with this issue about water. I'm doing a project which is called Ocean's Edge. And what I think is interesting about this is we're reaching into Rachel Carson's work, who's based in America in the 50s, one of the mothers of the modern environmental movement. And Rachel Carson took on that pesticide industry through a really beautiful book, The Silent Spring. And there you can see a book, in the same way that Mark talked about a film, changed the actual way that America saw the pesticide industry. So I think there is ways of art doing that. And I would encourage Olga and other people interested in the water industry to look at our project, The Ocean's Edge. What we're looking at, we've called it The Ocean's Edge. We're seeing the ocean as the center rather than the periphery. And when you see the ocean as the center, then you start to care about the health of the ocean. We tend to see ourselves as land dwellers on the edge of the land. But if it's the other way around, and actually the ocean is the center, then that's the thing we need to prioritize and really look at our imaginations of how we can protect that ocean and its health, which everybody probably knows the ocean provides 1 in every 2 breaths. So it's really, really fundamental to us as human beings.
Thank you, Alice. And also a good link, Olga, there to a water/pollution initiative from the art space. And I see there are other links also in the chat. So we're beginning to run out of time. And as a German, that makes me feel, I always feel like I need to stick to time. But in this case, there's such a rich discussion. Maybe we can, in fact, stay on a couple minutes extra. We've got 3 more hands up, and I'd like to at least give you 3 some space. So again, maybe I can take all 3 questions, and then we can distribute it to our panel and see who'd like to answer what. Matthias, then Bridget, and then Gloria. Matthias, over to you.
Yeah, thank you for this really rich conversation. I ask on behalf of Public Health and the UFA Group Environment and Doctors for Environment and a lot of the cultural projects that I experience in Zurich. So I add the question I already wrote down. If I go to the theatre spectacle, it's a theatre festival in Zurich, we have a lot of environmental and healthy and well-being nurturing activities there. I go to a festival like Films for Future that took up the youth protest 5 years ago and covers a couple of thousands visitors each year. This is where I have healthy tears as well, because this is the normal reaction, and actually I feel relieved afterwards. So there are different forms. Otherwise, I work as a doctor, and fortunately, as a doctor, we are not paid for any preventive work. So this is why I'm happy to support Theaterspektakel, Food Forum, and Films for Future. How can we make this visible on a platform that is led by the WHO or coordinated? That would be a question, because this way a couple of thousands of people being creative and health promoting in many rich ways as our conversation could be made visible. I think that would be a wonderful conclusion if the WHO is taking the lead on that and then spreading it across the world in Europe. I think it's possible.
Thank you very much, Matthias. Maybe I'll hand that to Francesca in a bit, but for now, let's hear from Gloria.
Oh, you said me first. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. I think you might have taken your hand out, so I can't see it.
Oh, sorry.
Oh, yeah, Bridget, over to you then. Sorry.
Sorry, I'd unmuted, so I was already about to speak.
Okay.
I'm from Climate Museum UK, and Culture Declares Emergency. And that word emergency is something really that we need to consider. So given that radical systemic change is essential, i.e., to stop this killing machine of extractive capitalism and to help us forge and imagine a regenerative world, is there any evidence, and was it investigated, that enabling activism for systemic change is the most important positive health factor, rather than the more kind of therapeutic kinds of work that just ease the symptoms? And I'd also want to add, would we be better talking about the Earth crisis as a whole rather than climate? I noticed a lot of the examples and speakers really talked about the bigger systemic issues, and climate is one very important one, but we really need to think more systemically. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. That's a great question. The last one I might hand over to Andy, so you can think about that. And Nisha, the evidence about the evidence about activism versus arts, I might distribute that to you. So have a think about that.
Sorry, not about activism versus arts. It's about the arts and culture being applied to all mental health interventions, being enabling activism and not stopping people being actively able to voice and change their system. Sorry to be pedantic.
No, not at all. Thanks for clarifying. I appreciate that. So Gloria, I think you might be the last hand in the room. So over to you, and then we'll start answering some of these questions.
Thank you. Hi all, I'm Gloria Munoz, based in the United Kingdom, London. I am a nurse, advanced kidney nurse, and the most actually my question is asking for some kind of support guidance on a project I started. So this is all very new to me, and I've learned so much from how integrating culture arts with health is so helpful for me. I've written a play. The updated global burden of chronic kidney disease was published in February this year. 1 death due to chronic kidney disease every 20 seconds. So I was thinking a lot about it, and one weekend I was inspired and wrote a play, and it's called Every 20 Seconds. There is a ballet dancer, there is an opera singer, a male actor, and then a female actor there. So my question is, how, and if somebody can please guide me how to secure a place, we will be showcasing this in October, 17th of October, but we are paying for the venue, everything, we are funding everything just to raise awareness. And we want to secure a place, a space where to do this kind of often, a few sessions, so others have the opportunity to attend. That's what I wanted to ask, please. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gloria. I think that's maybe a question again for the chat, because there's a much bigger resource in the chat than just our panel members. So please feel free to post that in the chat. I want to go back to Matthias's question, and I'm going to ask you, Francesca. I think the question was around how can we make this work at the intersection of culture and health more visible, particularly within the WHO platform. I hope this policy brief is starting to do that. But Francesca, maybe you and Rob, maybe you as well, have some other ideas.
Yeah, thank you very much. And thanks, Matthias, also because the International Society of Doctors for the Environment is one the key partners of our work in the civil society. So many thanks for that. Well, there are different ways of bringing these things more. Now in climate change policy, we say we need to bring more climate change into health policy and more health policy into climate change. Perhaps we need to do the same kind of shift in our disciplines, although it may be very often slightly counterintuitive. And perhaps a good entry point for us is to go and to think of arts and climate, or arts and environment and health, or arts and planetary health, as it would perhaps more correct to frame this, as being something very close to what we are more familiar with, which is citizen science. So they are both attempts that in society we have to express and to take ownership of the issues using different means. So perhaps we stand a good chance, for example, of bringing more of the culture, of the arts and cultural expressions in our scientific work, you know, as a part of what is there on display. And vice versa, you know, fertilizing more with the science, the work on health. This would be a very first, you know, attempt to bring this. And we have good platforms, for example, ministerial conferences, for example, point in time where we have the opportunity of interacting with actors within governments, together with partners in civil society. So thanks again for that.
Thanks very much, Francesca. Christina, I see your hand, but we've run out of time. So I'm going to let Andy have the final word here on the question of talking about an Earth crisis rather than just a climate crisis. Andy, any thoughts?
Well, I think thanks, Bridget, really for raising two pretty fundamental issues. One is whether we should be talking about this planetary crisis. And I'm really with you there. I mean, about 10 years ago, I had the privilege to chair something called the Planetary Health Commission for the Lancet Medical Journal. And we made the case that climate change was a key threat to human health. But of course, as we know now, there are 9 planetary boundaries and 7 of them have been transgressed. And many of the forces that are causing the climate crisis are also implicated in the transgression of other boundaries. The food system, for example, the burning of fossil fuels, our consumption patterns, and so on. So yes, I think we do have to think of this in an integrated way across these different planetary boundaries. The challenge we have is that many people think in a more reductionist and narrow way. So we have to be able to speak to both audiences, both those people who may be focusing on a particular topic, like air pollution and climate, and those who think in a much more systems-based way. So I think both approaches can be important. I agree with you that the planetary health approach is the one to take where we can, but we need to be flexible and we need to tailor our message to different audiences. And just you'll find the second point, which are just 30 seconds on, I very much agree with you that we can really link mental health, the positive mental health benefits of climate action with improved mental health by increasing sense of self and importantly, I think community efficacy. So as communities get together to try to tackle their local environmental problems, they can also improve the bonds between different members of the community if things work well. And I think many Indigenous leaders also really show us a similar way of working when many Indigenous communities work together and they don't see human health and the health of the environment as separate. In fact, they see them as totally integrated concepts. And maybe that's the idea that we need to work towards. So yes, very much agree with you that action is very much linked to positive mental health benefits. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Andy. Thank you very much to our panel. We have run out. In fact, we've run over time. I want to conclude this bit here and just once again, thank everybody who is on the panel, who is in the audience, who've asked questions, who are engaged, who are on this journey with us all. And of course, also to all the colleagues who have helped produce the policy brief, which, as Francesca pointed out, has been a long road. So thank you so much to all of you. And now I'll hand back to Amir.
Thank you, Niels. Thank you all. Thank you for everyone who's stayed here, so engrossed and involved in the chats. We've talked about awe and inspiration, and I would like to pass it to one last person who brings those two words to my mind, which is our colleague Christopher Bailey. If you'd like to share, I know you may have a few words and you may have a couple of lines of verse, so whichever one you like, Chris.
Thanks a lot, Amir. Yes, I think I'll slip in a little bit of science and a little bit of art to send us off. On the science part, awe has come up, so just to talk a little bit about what that is, Aristotle talked about that moment of shock and awe in a play where there was a revelation, but it was not only a surprise, the pattern leading up to that revelation is revealed. And at that moment of shock and awe, that combination of something being a surprise and inevitable is a contradiction. And the brain does not, like nature, abhors a contradiction, abhors a vacuum. And it fills that vacuum with a new neural pathway, a nonlinear form of learning, and that is reinforced with a shot of oxytocin, which is the bonding hormone. So literally, awe helps us reconnect to ourselves, to each other, and to the world around us. As Rebecca can testify, in Ireland, it's often used through social prescribing for people who have experienced trauma or transgenerational trauma of being exposed to the environment. And instead of feeling diminished, they feel that they are a small but essential part of a larger whole. I just came back from a residency in the Lakota Nation in South Dakota. And as part of the rite of passage, every adolescent to move from a self-centered infantile view of the universe to something into adulthood, they go on a vision quest. And in the wilderness, they also recognize that they too are a small but essential part of a whole. And Shakespeare, I think, in one line, captured this connective ability so beautifully. He said, "One touch of nature makes the whole world kin." And I'd like to leave you with that line.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Chris. That was really beautiful. Thank you all again. I really just want to say that to everyone here and to everyone all the researchers, all the people who've read countless versions of this, to the WHO, to our colleagues from the Bonn office in particular, to all our wonderful speakers, to all the incredible people and practitioners who've been sharing all their work in the chat. I just want to let you know that we will do our best to get everything from this chat, from the Q&A, to share it with you all along with the recordings. One of the words, one of the sort of the series of words that keep coming into my head with all of this is, a lot of things that start with reimagining, rewriting, remembering, reconnecting. And yeah, I just really want to express the hope that this brief gathering can contribute, to this rewriting and reimagining, lead to concrete action projects and policies. So thank you all so much. Wishing you a wonderful day and hoping to see this movement continue.